Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says case against Priya Ramani rejected. Before we understand what is this case all about, let's have a brief idea with respect to the background. One of the noticed journalists, Priya Ramani, accused MJ Akbar of sexual harassment. So she says that back in the year 1993, she went to a job interview. This is where MJ Akbar, who was interviewing her, had sexually harassed her. This was an allegation made by Priya Ramani, a journalist, against MJ Akbar, who was then the union minister. After this particular allegation was made, a criminal defamation case was also filed against Priya Ramani by MJ Akbar. Why? That is because according to MJ Akbar, this particular allegation is lie, and as a result, this has a major stake to the reputation, which is why criminal defamation case was filed against Priya Ramani. It was a case which was filed in Delhi court, and the Delhi court looks into this particular case and has now delivered a judgment that Priya Ramani is acquitted and is absolved of all the charges. In this particular backdrop, we have to understand what does this case gives to us, and we also have to understand the idea of criminal defamation. First up, whenever we speak about civil cases, we have what is called as the Limitation Act. What is this Limitation Act? The law of limitation prescribes a particular time period during which a right can be enforced in a court of law. Ordinarily, this Limitation Act is applicable to the civil cases. What are these civil cases? It can be property dispute, it can be a violation of contract as well, or it can be a tort as well, such which is not going against the state, which is not going against the society, where there is an individual dispute, is primarily the civil case. So this Limitation Act of 1963 is primarily on the civil cases. Now let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, I have given you a check. This check is valued, let's say, about 10 lakhs, but after some time you realize that this is a check bounce case. So during this particular period, you are calm, you do not want to go to the court of law, but you suddenly realize that after 3 or 4 years you want to go to the court of law. The court of law will not accept this particular case. Why? This is where the law of limitation of 1963 enters into picture. So it says if it is a check bounce case, you have your right, yes, it is violated, but you should have appeared to the court of law within 3 years. Likewise, there can be immovable property case as well, where a particular assumption is that it is for about 12 years. So basically, when it comes to the Limitation Act, the law shall only assist those who are vigilant and those who care for their rights, and it is not for the lazy, says the Limitation Act of 1963. So what does the Limitation Act of 1963 says? That in case there is a violation of your right, and if there is this violation, you have to approach the court of law within a prescribed timeline. Example, hypothetical example, if it is property, you have to go to the court of law, let's say 4 years, or it is 5 years, or any other issue. For all the civil cases, there is a prescribed timeline that you have to approach to the court of law. This is what is Limitation Act. Now when it comes to criminal cases, what are the criminal cases? That which is against the society, where a person has committed heinous act of murder or a case of rape, that is what is called as criminal in offense. Where is it defined? It is given in the Indian Penal Code. What exactly happens when it comes to the criminal in nature? When it comes to the civil cases, we have the Limitation Act. Likewise, we also have the limitation which are prescribed in the CRPC for the criminal acts as well. But there is an exception. What is this exception? Let's say, for example, there is a murder that has happened about 10 years back. Back then we did not get any evidence whatsoever, but today we have got the evidence. Can this case be opened in the court of law? Yes, that is an exception. Yes, we do have the limitations under the CRPC, which is the procedures for the criminal code, but there are exceptions as well, where a certain evidence is found out which was not present when the act was committed or immediately before 3 years or 4 years, and now we have found the evidence, in which case a criminal case can also be opened. It can be murder or it can be rape, and in the present situation we are speaking about sexual harassment. What is this case all about? The Delhi High Court looked into this particular case. It has now acquitted Priya Ramani, and the Delhi court has gone on to say that women have the right to put their grievance before any platform of her choice even decades after the incident. This happens to be a criminal issue. This is a sexual harassment issue. So there are exceptions given to the criminal case that when we have the evidence or the women are not able to showcase their grievance back then because there is an opposite party who might have huge amount of might behind them, they have financial advantage. In such a case of criminal assault or sexual harassment, they would be able to voice out their opinion even after decades, says this Delhi court. Women also have the right to speak up about their violations, and this is not restricted by the passage of time, which means to say there is no limitation, says this particular Delhi court. And at the same time, it has also gone ahead and say when you have right to reputation, which is also guaranteed, then you also have what is called as the right to live with dignity as well. In such a case, balance is required. But the court has also gone ahead and said that right of reputation cannot be protected at the cost of right of life and dignity as guaranteed under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. When right to life holds the primary precedent, right to reputation will become secondary, says this Delhi court when it comes to this particular case. The Delhi court through this particular order has reaffirmed the spirit of the Vishaka guidelines by upholding the right to a violence-free, safe workplace when it comes to the sexual harassment at workplace. This is what we have to understand in reference to this particular case. But we also have to have a fair bit of an idea about the criminal defamation as well. We will not dig too much into this particular issue as much as we require with respect to the UPSC examination. Let's have a bird eye view with respect to the criminal defamation. We have to look at IPC section 44. What does IPC section 44 speaks about? It speaks about injury. What is this injury? Let's say I come and I hit you. What do you have? It's a physical pain. Let's say for example I torture you psychologically. What exactly happens? There is psychological torture. So when it comes to the IPC, injury not just denotes to physical pain, body pain, mind, psychological pain, but it also deals with reputation as well. And if this reputation is violated, that is what is called as defamation. So whenever a person has felt that there is reputational loss against him, he can file what is called as defamation. When it comes to defamation, it can be two in nature. One is civil in nature, the other is criminal in nature. What is this civil in nature? In this particular case, let's say for example, I have written a letter. This I have put it in the public forum, and the person who happens to the victim, his reputation is at loss. So what does he do? He asks for the compensation. He asks for the damage. So when it comes to the civil defamation, you go to the court of law, you plead before the court of law that there is reputation loss because of one particular person. So the court in this particular case gives you damages or the compensation. So the person will not end up in the jail, but instead a person who's committed this particular act will have to pay certain charges as a way of compensation. That is what is called as civil defamation. This usually comes under what is called as the law of the torch. You don't have to know too much about the law of torch. To put it out in simple, law of torch is where we do not have an explicit law. Let's say for example, when it comes to contract, we have the Contract Act of 1872, or let's say we are speaking about goods, we have the Sale of the Goods Act. When you eliminate all these acts, and when you're giving your particular judgment, when the court is giving a particular judgment, if it is on the basis of precedents of the court, that is what is called as tort. So when it comes to civil defamation, it is a law of tort. But now our focus is in reference to criminal defamation. So what is this criminal defamation? Basically, you approach to the court of law, and the court of law will penalize this particular person under IPC section 500. Before that, we have to understand what does IPC section 499 speaks about criminal defamation. What does it say? It says whoever by words either spoken or intended to be read, or by signs or by visible representation, makes or publishes any imputation. What is this imputation? Basically, you're making a charge, you're making an accusation against some particular person concerning any person intending to harm or knowing or having reason to believe that such imputation will harm the reputation of such a person. That is what is called as defamation. So you write something, you show something that should be in the public forum. So when you instigate or write something which is harming the reputation of another person, that is what is called as defamation. So kindly remember, when it comes to defamation, let's say for example, I have written a letter. This letter goes to a particular person. So that particular person feels offended because this particular letter that I have written is a loss of reputation for him. Can it be defamation? No. This particular idea will have to be put in the public forum, and when there is loss of reputation to that particular person or to his family or to his company, in such a scenario is where criminal defamation can be taken up. So that is what it says, that it has to be published or it has to be communicated to others in the general public. That is where a criminal defamation can be filed. And in case a criminal defamation is filed and the court of law has approved it, it has been proved in the court of law, that is where section 500 of the Indian Penal Code steps into picture, and the person can be put behind bars for up to 2 years with or without fine if it has been held guilty under criminal defamation. However, when it comes to these defamations, they are compoundable in nature. What do we mean by compoundable? These are basically for less serious offenses. Let's say for example, defamation in this particular case, let's say I have written a particular wording or I have shown some signs to a person who is the victim. In that case, I can enter into a compromise with that person. I go and plead him, I ask him for a sorry, or we negotiate with each other. I say I'm sorry, it will not happen in the near future. For the less serious offenses where compromise can come into picture, that is what is called as the compoundable offense. So a compoundable offense is where it is less serious in nature, and these are the offenses where the victim enters into a compromise and agrees to drop all the charges. But this should be on a bona fide intent, but this should not be on force or treachery. So this is what we understand with respect to defamation. But do remember, there has been criticisms with respect to defamation as well. What are these criticisms? One is that it violates the freedom of speech and expression as enshrined under Article 19 of 1. The other is it violates the freedom of press as well. Let's say for example, there is one of the newspaper outlets. Let's say they're taking upon a rich person, an industrialist, or let's say for example, one of the huge IT companies. In that particular case, they have showcased something which is against the particular society, but because there is reputational loss of that industrialist or that particular company, they will file a defamation suit against the press, and as a result, most of the press are against this defamation, and they say that this should be completely removed from the penal provisions. So these are some of the criticisms when it comes to defamation. So what is the conclusion that we can draw? Yes, freedom of speech is important, and at the same time the reputation of a person is also important. So what we require is a balance of freedom of speech and the dignity of an individual, which matters for that particular person. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about road accident. Let's look into the statistics as given under this article. According to the article, it says India has, according to the World Bank Commission report, traffic crash injuries and disabilities has 1% of the world's vehicles, but it commits to 11% of the road accident deaths. The Union Transport Ministry put the number of dead in 2019 to 1,51,113 and the injured to 4,51,364. Drawing an approximate number, can we say that every year more than 1.5 lakh people lose their lives in our country because of road accidents. Accidents are also among the major causes of disability and morbidity in India, and this causes immense hardship, economic problems, and emotional trauma because they lose their near and dear ones. Therefore, to make people aware of the traffic rules, persuade them, discourage them not to violate the traffic rules, what we have is called as the Road Safety Week. What is this Road Safety Week? This is an initiative taken by the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways. What exactly happens? This is a national event basically to encourage the people to follow the rules of road safety. They are encouraged to follow all the traffic rules and minimize the casualties due to the road accidents. So the people are encouraged how to drive on road by organizing various programs related to road safety. But this year, this Road Safety Week has been enhanced to what is called as Road Safety Month. Earlier, we had this particular encouragement program only for 1 week, and this has been extended now to 1 month. So this Road Safety Month was conducted in the month of January from 18th of January up until 17th of February 2021, which ended yesterday. What was the theme of it? The theme of 2021 was Sadak Suraksha Jeevan Raksha. In spite of all these measures and steps taken by the government, there is continuance of these road accidents, says this article. It takes into picture one of the recent incidents that happened in the state of Madhya Pradesh, where one of the buses that was traveling from one place to another fell into a canal, and this meant that about 51 people lost their lives. So the article goes on to speak about certain concerns and issues area and where the government will have to concentrate going forward to minimize the disastrous consequences of the road accidents. First, it takes into picture the Motor Vehicles Amendment Act of 2019. This happens to be one of the important legislations when it comes to road accidents. It came up with a new perspective. It said that contractors, consultants, civic agencies will be accountable for all the faulty designs, construction, poor maintenance of roads that which might lead to accidents. But when it comes to the enforcement, the state governments have given a lukewarm response to this particular issue, says the author. The second example that he takes is in reference to the National Road Safety Board. According to the legislation as passed by the central government, there was supposed to be what is called as the National Road Safety Board. What was the responsibility of this board? It will guide the government for adaptation of new technology. It will suggest both the central government and state governments what new technology can be adapted when it comes to road, and at the same time they also wanted to make sure that they take up all the new advances, research and development in couple of countries, and the same advice is given to the state governments as well. But in the present scenario, what we actually witness is with respect to the operationalization of the road safety board. So what is happening here? The central government has said that there will be this particular board, but when it will be operationalized and what suggestions will be given is yet to be notified, is the second major concern. The third concern is that there are political parties and others who actually fix illegal flagpoles and spears on their car bonnets and metal devices on their SUV bumpers. So whenever there is an accident, there have been instances where the victims or the sufferers have hit this particular area or the bonnet, and they have suffered disability or in fact lost their lives as well. And if there are families who have lost their near and dear ones because of the road accident, and if this particular person happens to be the breadwinner of the family, in such a scenario, women bear the long term financial and psychological impact of the losses, says this article. In order to overcome all these issues, what we require is the political will. Apart from the political will, apart from the legislations that are passed, apart from the central government and the state government coordination, what we also require is education that has to be provided to the people. And at the same time, the government should also take the responsibility as well. What are the responsibilities? Most of the accidents that are suffered in India are also because of the potholes and also because of the bad design as well. Yes, the government of India has come up with the Motor Vehicles Act of 2019. It has also fixed the liability on the contractor, but does it mean it is actually being implemented? The answer is a clear no. So what we require is a multi-stakeholder approach. What is this multi-stakeholder approach? Yes, the government will come up with the law. These laws will be implemented. There will be penalties which has to be respected by the people, and at the same time, the government should have every responsibility that it takes, that if there is a pothole, it has to fix this particular pothole, and if there is an engineering design which is new in nature, which will actually help in that particular region, this has to be taken care by the government. So what we require is a multi-stakeholder approach approach where civil society cooperation and professional policing is also required by the government. And at the same time, one of the important fundamental rights as enshrined under Constitution is Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Whenever there are road accidents or when people lose their lives because of road accidents, there is Article 21 which is violated. So what should the government do? The government should not come up with incremental steps but take an objective holistic view about the road accidents and should come up with steps is what is this article all about. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says redefining the exit plan for COVID-19. What is this article speaking about? It is speaking about how we can overcome this particular issue of COVID-19. COVID-19 hit us all. It has impacted us economically and also on the health front. To overcome this particular issue, governments have come together. We have also had research institutions come together, private organizations come together, and the scientific community come together. And they have come up with what is called as the Vaccine Developmental Program. There are n number of vaccines that are out in the market. And in India, we have two vaccines as well. One is what is called as Covishield. The other is the Covaxin. While all this was happening, while we have the development of the vaccine as well, how are we supposed to exit the COVID-19 if COVID-19 cases persist is what is this article all about. The article goes and gives two important recommendations. One is what is called as the control strategy. The other is what is called as the elimination strategy. What is this control strategy? When you look into the control strategy, the article currently goes on to say that as we saw in the month of March 2020 and in the month of April 2020 and subsequently after that, there was increasing cases of COVID-19. So what we actually witness is that large number of people were losing their lives. The numbers of COVID-19 impacted people were also increasing as well. When we step into 2021, the number of cases are subsequently reducing. The incidence that we are seeing is also reducing. The severity is also reducing. And at the same time, the deaths or the mortality rate is also reducing when it comes to the COVID-19. Then there is another approach the article speaks about. What is it? It is called as elimination strategy. What is this elimination strategy? When it comes to the control approach, we might have, let's say, hypothetical numbers. Let's say the population of New Zealand is about 10 lakhs. But when it comes to what is called as the control approach, there might be presence of about, let's say, 50,000 coronavirus patients, or let's say about 1 lakh coronavirus patients. But in elimination strategy, it has to be zero. So it has to be completely eliminated. So whatever COVID-19 cases are persisting in a particular country should be completely rooted out and should be at bare minimum level. It can be about 1000 cases or it can be about 500 odd cases. So what we have is bare minimum level and complete close elimination of COVID-19. That is called as the elimination strategy. So when it comes to control strategy, there are people but the cases are reducing. But when it comes to elimination strategy, the number of people is close to the complete zero. That is what is elimination strategy. When it comes to the elimination strategy, there are three elements. What are these three elements? One is the number of infections is close to zero and we have to reduce it close to zero. And what we have to create is virus free zones as well. So once we report that there is a particular area which is completely eliminated with COVID-19 virus, what we have to require is the free virus zones. So this particular area or the region is where there are no virus cases. The third is what we have to look is in case there is a particular region which is declared free of virus, and if there is a case, the management will have to immediately step in and has to isolate this particular incident and make sure that we again have the free area. This is the strategy or the element when it comes to the elimination strategy. But can this be implemented on the ground root level? It can be implemented only in certain regions and countries. Let's say, for example, we take the example of New Zealand. New Zealand happens to be a small country. The number of people who actually go in and go out might be comparatively less as well. And New Zealand is also one of the developed countries or an advanced countries. So what exactly happens? when we consider such a country, they would be in a position to vaccinate all the people in their country. Why? Because the population is less and their advanced economy as well. They would be able to procure these vaccines and they would also be able to give this particular vaccine to their people. So what is the first strategy? They would be able to vaccinate their people. The second strategy would also be border closure as well. In case, let's assume this is a small country, the number of people who are going outside the country and coming inside the country are less. What they actually do is to make sure that they have a strict border control as well. If they are able to make sure that there is vaccination provided to the people and border is locked, that is when it can be resulting in what is called a zero cases or elimination strategy. But ideally, this particular process does not work, says the author. Why? Because he says that infection is present everywhere. Let's say, for example, New Zealand has some of the very good universities, or let's say, for example, New Zealand has very good businesses as well. Let's say one of the persons from some other country happens to travel to New Zealand. Let's say there is a variant which is not shown, or they are not able to catch this particular symptom as well. In such a scenario, this person traveling from one country to New Zealand can also increase the variant or the virus in that particular country. So the infection, since it is present elsewhere, it can still harm New Zealand, says the author. The author further goes on to say, since the universal coverage of the vaccine with consistent upgrades might not be present, the vaccine is here to stay. We did discuss about the UK variant. We did discuss about the South African variant as well. So as and when there is a variant, we also require the upgradation as well. As we discussed in our yesterday's CNA, when it comes to the Covaxin and the Covishield, they were not that effective when it comes to the South African variant. So it requires continuous upgradation. So you cannot completely eliminate the virus, says the second argument. And at the same time, the third argument goes on to say that if only rich countries are vaccinated, it will worsen the global health inequities, and creating green zones of free travel among the rich countries means that there is an alienation of the poor countries. All these arguments means that on the theoretical level, yes, we would be able to have what is called as the elimination strategy. But in reality, what we have to focus is on the control approach and it is not on the elimination approach, says the author. Now let's take into another example. We have the number of diseases. Let's say for example measles, or let's say for example neonatal tetanus. We have vaccines. We also have people who are being administering vaccines to the people who have been impacted by these diseases is there. But do we have complete elimination? No. Once again, let's take the example of polio. Polio is completely eliminated in most of the countries, but it is still persisting in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now let's take the example of SARS-CoV-2. Do we have any idea when this can be eliminated? Again, no. So looking at these parameters, again, the author goes on to say what we require is the control strategy and not the elimination strategy. So how do we control the number of cases? That is where the author says that we have to ramp up the vaccine coverage for all the vulnerable people across the world. So it is not only with respect to the rich country, or it is not about poor country. Since COVID-19 can be induced by any person around the world, we have to make sure that vaccine coverage is given to every single person, even the poor countries, where the rich countries will have to contribute for the same, says the author. We have to currently increase the current pace of vaccination to at least about 4.3% as well. Why? That is because as of now, at the current rate, we are giving vaccination to about 1.46 million people per day. If we are able to increase it, then more number of people will be vaccinated and we would be able to keep a check on the COVID-19. Apart from this, we also have to focus on the elderly section and persons with comorbidity so that we are able to keep a check of COVID-19, says the author. If we are not able to keep a check, we will be reversing the gains that we have made in some other sector as well. Let's say for example tuberculosis, we are able to keep a check on tuberculosis. If we are not able to keep a check on COVID-19, other issues will surface. There will be inequality in the society. The rich might get richer, they might get vaccines, but it is the poor and the poor countries who will be the major sufferers. And as a result, in order to overcome all these issues, these steps of revamping and giving administration of vaccines to the poor sections and the poor countries need to be taken on the priority, says the author. So what we require is the universal health coverage. So COVID-19 cannot be eliminated completely. It will be with us. So what we require is the control mechanism, says the author in this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says Sri Lanka cancels Pakistan PM's address to Parliament. Sri Lanka has cancelled Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan's planned address to the Parliament. What is this all about? Let's say back in the year 2015, we had Prime Minister Narendra Modi who had visited Sri Lanka. He had given one of the speeches in the Sri Lankan Parliament, which meant that we are increasing the bonhomie between Sri Lanka and India. We want to establish a better relationship with the other country. Now, if we go back to the year 1962, we have Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru who had once again given a speech in the Parliament of Sri Lanka. Similar instances have happened with Pakistan Prime Minister and their heads of the state who have gone to Sri Lanka in the past as well. But in the present scenario, there was a particular address that was to be given by Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan. Now Sri Lanka has said that this particular address will be called off. That is because of COVID-19 issue. Officially, they have said that COVID-19 related restrictions have been imposed, and as a result, Imran Khan may not be able to speak in the Parliament of Sri Lanka. But sources from Sri Lanka also say that there is an established policy of Pakistan. What is this Pakistan established policy? That whenever they get any international platforms, in all these platforms, they take up the issue of Kashmir, which is why Sri Lanka was not happy with that, and which is why they have resisted this particular move and has called off Prime Minister of Pakistan from speaking in the Parliament. Whenever Pakistan has got a platform, let's say for example in the SAARC meeting or for example in the SCO, most of these international platforms, Pakistan has a government policy that it has to speak about Kashmir issue. This might not be good according to Sri Lanka for the Indian-Sri Lankan relationship, which is why they have ensured that Pakistan Prime Minister will not speak in the Parliament of Sri Lanka. Even in the past as well, whenever there is a dispute between India and Pakistan with respect to Kashmir, Sri Lanka has taken a stand with respect to India. It has supported the cause of India as well. So indirectly, it means that if Pakistan is given a platform to speak about in this Parliament of Sri Lanka, they might take up the issue of Kashmir, which might have ramifications with India, and as a result, they have suspended this particular meeting and have called off addressing the Parliament of Sri Lanka. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says a growing rights crisis in Sri Lanka. What is this article all about? We have the United Nations Human Rights Council. It will be holding its 46th regular sessions from 22nd of February up until 23rd of March 2021 in Geneva. What will be this session all about? This will be a session where the United Nations Human Rights Council will look into all the violations of human rights issues across the world. And one thing that it will also focus is in reference to Sri Lanka and its human rights violations. What are these human rights violations? Back in the year 2005 up until 2015, we had Mahinda Rajapaksa who was the president of Sri Lanka. So what exactly happened during this particular period? There was human rights violations, abuse that had taken place in the country of Sri Lanka. Minorities were not respected, Tamil minorities were killed as well, civilians were summarily executed, and what we actually witnessed is huge amount of deaths. And in case there are people who voice their concern against the government, there are also situations where they were eliminated as well. And after 2015, we had the Mahinda Rajapaksa who lost the presidential elections. Minorities' rights were respected, freedom of expression were respected, militarized situation came under check, and the Human Rights Council offered the victims of abuses and their families what is called as truth, justice and reconciliation. Now, once again, what we have is the new government which happens to be headed by Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The minute there was new government established in 2019, there is again prevalence of abuses. The religious rights of minorities are again under check. The Rajapaksa government has not shown any accountability to these violations, and Rajapaksa has even pardoned some of the officers who are present in the army who have committed heinous act of killing, including children as well. All this means that there will be human rights violations. All this means that United Nations Human Rights Council will be looking into it, and what we will also discuss is after 22nd of February. Why? Because we will have this council meeting and they will look into this particular issue and they will also deliver their verdict. So we will take up this article comprehensively after 22nd of February. Now let's look into the next article. This article here makes a mention about Nilgiri Mountain Railway. This can be very important from your preliminary examination point of view. There are three important railways. One is the Darjeeling Himalayan Railway, the Nilgiri Mountain Railway, and the Kalka Shimla Railway. All these three railways are called as the Mountain Railways of India and are collectively designated as UNESCO World Heritage Site under the name Mountain Railways of India. So kindly remember, these three railways have been accorded what is called as the UNESCO World Heritage Site under the tag name Mountain Railways of India. The Darjeeling Himalayan Railway received this particular order in the year 1999. The Nilgiri Mountain Railway got this particular designation in the year 2005, and the Kalka Shimla Railway got this designation in the year 2008. So kindly remember, when it comes to India, these three railways have got what is called as the designation of Mountain Railways of India. It can be very important from your preliminary examination. Why was this given? That is because of the outstanding example of engineering marvel that they were able to penetrate established rail connectivity in some of the mountain terrains. That is why this designation has been given to all these railways. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. Right to reputation should not be at the cost of freedom of speech and right to live with human dignity. Analyze the statement in reference to defamation. Next question. Ending the silent pandemic of accidents will need education, civil society cooperation, and professional policing. Discuss. So please write all your answers on the comment section, peer review, and also come up with some positive feedback so that your friends are encouraged to write more. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.